You wake up. Something's wrong before you're even fully conscious. A deep, low ache in your belly, like a fist slowly closing. You curl your knees up. You reach for the heating pad you now keep by the bed because it's that time of the month again. And you think what basically every person who's ever had a period has thought at some point. Why? Why does this hurt so much? It's just your body doing a routine thing. It's done hundreds of times. So why does it feel like you're being punished for it? Here's the strange part. That pain you're feeling isn't a malfunction. It's not your body getting it wrong. It's your body doing exactly what it evolved to do. And the reason it hurts goes back further than farming, further than writing, further than cities, further than our species even existed in the form you'd recognize. The ache in your stomach right now is the echo of a war. A real one. Fought inside the human body for millions of years between two sides you'd never expect. And the last piece of this might change how you think about your own body forever. So, why do periods hurt? Sit with that for a second. Because the honest answer is stranger than it just does. Let's start with what's actually happening in there because almost everyone gets this part wrong. Most people assume period pain is about hormones. Estrogen, progesterone, the usual suspects. You've heard the words, you figure they're the culprits. They're not. Not directly. The real cause is a chemical you've probably never heard of, and it's called a prostaglandin. Here's the setup. Every month, your uterus builds up a thick, blood-rich lining, getting ready in case a pregnancy happens. When it doesn't, that lining has to go. And your body's method for getting rid of it is brutally simple. It squeezes it out. Your uterus, which, by the way, is one of the strongest muscles in the entire human body, pound for pound, contracts to push the lining loose. And the thing that tells it to contract is prostaglandins, these little inflammatory chemicals released as the lining starts to break down. More prostaglandins, harder squeeze, more pain. People with severe cramps consistently show higher prostaglandin levels in their menstrual fluid than people with mild ones. That's not a guess. That correlation is one of the most solid findings in the whole field, and the Mayo Clinic will tell you the same thing flat out. So already, we flipped the story. It's not your hormones hurting you. It's your uterus doing a job a little too enthusiastically. But here's where it gets stranger. Because the squeezing is only half the pain. Think about the last time you got a muscle cramp in your leg. A Charlie horse, mid-run, mid-sleep, whatever. That specific seizing agony. Do you know why that actually hurts? It's not just the muscle tightening. It's that the tightening cuts off the blood flow. No blood means no oxygen, and a muscle starved of oxygen screams. That's called ischemia. And it's precisely what's happening in your uterus right now. Because one of those prostaglandins, the one called PGF2-ACA, does two things at once. It makes the muscle contract and it clamps down on the tiny blood vessels feeding the uterine wall. So with every contraction, the muscle squeezes and strangles its own blood supply at the same time. Oxygen drops. The tissue starts to suffocate, and it sends out pain signals that your brain reads as that deep, cramping ache. That's why the pain comes in waves instead of one steady note. Squeeze, starve, release. Squeeze, starve, release. Read that again because it's kind of horrifying when you realize it. Part of period pain is your uterus briefly cutting off its own oxygen over and over. And there's a third layer, which is the cruel one. Other chemicals in the same inflammatory family, called leukotrienes, don't cause the pain directly. They just crank up the volume on your pain nerves, making everything you feel register as worse. And here's the twist that matters. Most standard painkillers only block the prostaglandin pathway. They don't touch the leukotrienes. So for the people whose pain is driven by those instead, the ones who've been told to just take some ibuprofen and been quietly failed by it for years, this is why. It was never that they weren't trying hard enough. Their pain was running on a channel the pills don't reach. So now you know the machinery. But that just moves the real question one step back, doesn't it? Because you have to ask, why is any of this necessary? Why did evolution build a system this violent, this painful, into half of all humans? Loads of animals reproduce just fine. Do they all go through this every month? No. And this is the part almost nobody knows. Here's a fact to sit with. Out of more than 5,000 species of mammal on this planet, the number that actually menstruate, that bleed the way humans do, is somewhere around 84. That's roughly 1.5%. Cats don't. Dogs don't. Horses, cows, rabbits, no. Almost every mammal alive, when a pregnancy doesn't happen, simply reabsorbs the uterine lining back into the body. Quiet. Tidy. No blood, no shedding, no cramps. They recycle it. We don't. We build the whole thing up and then tear it down and throw it away every single month at real metabolic cost with real pain, which, from an evolutionary standpoint, looks completely insane. Evolution is ruthless about waste. It doesn't usually keep an expensive, painful process around for no reason. So there has to be a reason, and the reason is a genuine surprise. The women who menstruate, humans, some other primates, a few bats, the elephant shrew, and weirdly one spiny mouse, all share something called spontaneous decidualization. Ignore the ugly name. Here's what it means. In most mammals, the uterus only thickens and prepares after an embryo shows up and signals it to. The embryo is in charge, it knocks and the uterus answers. But in us, the preparation happens on its own, every cycle, whether there's an embryo or not. Your body doesn't wait to be asked. It prepares in advance, then dismantles it all if no one comes. That dismantling is your period. So why on earth would the body take control away from the embryo and do all this preemptively? And this is the answer that reframes everything. It evolved out of conflict, specifically a war between the parent and the embryo. We tend to picture pregnancy as this gentle, harmonious thing. It isn't, not at the biological level. Think about it from the embryo's point of view for a second. Its entire goal is to survive and grow, and to do that, it wants to pull as much blood, nutrition, and resources from the parent as it possibly can. Human embryos are among the most aggressive, most invasive of any species. They burrow deep into the uterine wall and tap directly into the bloodstream. The parent's body, meanwhile, has the opposite interest. It needs to survive this pregnancy and possibly many more. It can't afford to be drained dry by one demanding embryo, especially one that might not even be healthy enough to make it. So the parent's body evolved a defense. By thickening the lining in advance, on its own terms, the uterus builds a kind of screening layer, a way to test an embryo, to control how deep it can dig, to hold the upper hand in the negotiation. It's the parent's body saying, I decide what happens here, not you. Spontaneous decidualization is the parent winning a strategic move in an arms race millions of years old. And your period, the bleeding, the cramps, all of it, is the byproduct. It's what's left over when that elaborate defensive setup goes unused for a month and has to be cleared out. This is the model laid out by researchers like Dina Emira and colleagues back in 2012. And it completely rewrites how you might see the whole thing. The pain isn't pointless. It's the cost of a body that evolved to protect itself. Think about that. But there's still something that doesn't add up. If this system is so ancient, so deeply built into us, why does it feel like modern life is drowning in period pain? Why does it seem so much more common now? Here's the answer, and it might be the most important part. Because your body is running a program written for a completely different life than the one you're living. Picture an ancestral woman, tens of thousands of years ago, a forager living the way humans lived for almost all of our history. From the time she could have children, she was likely either pregnant or breastfeeding for years at a stretch, and extended breastfeeding suppresses ovulation, which means no cycle, then another pregnancy, then more breastfeeding. Over her whole life, researchers estimate a woman like that might have had somewhere around 40 menstrual periods, maybe up to 100 at the outside. Now here's the number for a woman today. Over 400. Read that again. 400 versus 40. This estimate goes back to work by Roger Short in the 1970s and was built on by anthropologists like Beverly Strassman studying populations who still live closer to that ancestral pattern. Women averaging around 2 periods a year, roughly 100 in a lifetime. We menstruate up to 10 times more often than the bodies we inherited were ever expecting to. And that's the mismatch. Your uterus, Your prostaglandins, that whole ancient defensive system, none of it evolved to run this often. Earlier first periods, later menopause, far fewer pregnancies, little to no extended breastfeeding. We've taken a process the body ran a few dozen times across a lifetime and cranked it up to a monthly event for 30, 40 years straight. This is why some researchers now frame a lot of modern menstrual suffering as a genuine evolutionary mismatch. The slow pace of biology colliding with how fast our lives have changed. Your pain isn't a sign something's broken. In a way, it's a sign of how safe and well-fed and long-lived we've become, which is a deeply strange thing to feel while you're doubled over with a heating pad. There's one last layer, and I saved it for the end because it's the strangest part of all of this. That contraction happening in your uterus right now, the squeezing, the ache, the waves, it is mechanically the exact same thing as labor. The same muscle, the same chemical, prostaglandin, driving it. In fact, prostaglandins are what the body uses to kick off childbirth itself. A period cramp is a labor contraction in miniature. Same machinery, smaller scale. And for people with severe cramps, it isn't always that miniature. Measured on a pain scale, the worst period pain reaches a 7, 8, even a 10 landing in the same range as early labor contractions. Which means some people every single month quietly go to work, sit in class, answer emails while their body runs a low-grade version of giving birth. And most of the world has no idea because they were told it's normal and to keep it to themselves. So, why do periods hurt? They hurt because your uterus is one of the strongest muscles you have, and it's squeezing itself hard enough to briefly cut off its own oxygen. They hurt because of a chemical called prostaglandin, doing a job it does a little too well. And underneath all of that, they hurt because you're carrying the outcome of an evolutionary war. A body that learned, over millions of years, to defend itself against its own offspring, and kept the machinery even when no offspring comes. Only 1.5% of mammals go through this. You're one of them. Not because your body is failing, but because it's doing something almost no other creature on Earth does, and doing it far more often than it was ever built to. So the next time you wake up at 3 a.m. with that deep ache and reach for the heating pad, and you think why, just for a second, know what you're actually feeling. It's not a flaw. It's not weakness. It's an ancient defense system, still running, still winning a fight that ended before you were born. Your body remembers a war you never fought, and it's still standing guard.